event to a more family-friendly one. But for me, the one thing that no one's talking about is the ticket prices are not family-friendly. A good ticket for an adult for 2 days, $170 plus, no thank you. If it was half that, I would have gone, I don't want to sit in the first row at ground level. I want a decent seat to watch the game. And Kiwi Blog, I notice, also asks if the Sevens have got greedy. It's not the fun police that killed the Sevens. What do you reckon has done it?
Well, actually, I watched about three and a half hours of the Sevens, but I watched it in a pub. And I watched it wearing my Scottish rugby jersey, eating haggis, tatties and neeps, and drinking Scottish craft beer and cheering as Scotland beat England. And it should be noted that Scotland came third in the tournament and the All Blacks came sixth. So the spectacle, the rugby was excellent. It was very enjoyable. And actually, the pub was quite busy. There were a lot of people cheering for various teams. But it was interesting that they were there rather than at the stadium. And it was cringeworthy how empty the stands were when they panned around. It was like, goodness me, look at everyone's dressed up as a yellow seat.
Yeah, and, that's right. Everybody's the Simpsons.
And it was just, and so it was terrible. And so it used to be the hardest ticket to get, and now you probably could have given away 20,000 tickets and still not filled the stadium. So it is a little bit embarrassing. It is a combination of the price, it's a combination of the emphasis on the partying and not the rugby, which I think is sad. I don't think going to a full sort of family friendly kind of thing is right. I think it should be more, the emphasis should go back on the rugby. If you go and look at the Wellington Sevens page, web page, there's no mention really of the rugby at all. It's all about the food and it's all about the music,
the noise and the costumes,
and it's just like, well, no, actually it should be mainly watching sport and then maybe having a drink and maybe making some new friends. So the emphasis has got all wrong, and it's sort of in a downward spiral. And it's just
well,
it's
the lag as well. So people have been put off for years by the fact that it was a boozy, event, taking a while, because they're not in the habit of it now.
No.
So whereas something like, say, the Wellington Cup has always had that event-focused part of it, where you do dress up and get legless. Some people do, but always the sport part of that has always at least had an equivalent, if not more, sort of waiting, and the Sevens never had.
From your point of view, though, did it start off as a fun event, fun boozy, and become not so fun boozy? Or from the outside, have people got the wrong idea of what the Sevens always was, Catherine?
Well, I used to work in an office that looked down onto Courtenay Place. And since the Sevens began, 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, you'd just be the shouts of drunken yobs in costumes, usually in women's clothing, I have to say. It's the one time where they feel that they can get dressed up in women's clothing. And it was most distracting, and you didn't want to go out and get lunch. And this was right from the beginning when the Sevens started. So no, I don't think it's ever been, a sport-friendly event or a spectator-friendly event.
I disagree with that slightly, in the sense that I went to sort of the first 6 or 7 of them, and at the start there was really a focus on the rugby, and the dressing up sort of was in the background.
Maybe I needed to not be at Courtenay Place, and I needed to be at the stadium. Yeah.
But then it became unfashionable to watch the rugby.
True.
You needed to go more often, Catherine.
Well, I certainly needed to get out of Courtenay Place, I can tell you that much.
Catherine Robertson has been on the panel today. Thank you so much, Catherine. And
Thank you
too, Neil Miller.
Always a pleasure.
As well. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and we are back tomorrow with Brian Edwards and Michelle Bogue on board, and Checkpoint with John Campbell is coming right up.
Kia ora everyone. So late breaking are the things we're covering today that I've just rushed into the studio to tell you what we've got on tonight. Of course, Sally Yates, the acting Attorney General in the United States, the woman charged with implementing Donald Trump's executive order, said she would not implement it as long as she was acting Attorney General. The federal courts would not defend it, so he has fired her. All of this is breaking. Extraordinary times in Washington. We will have in-depth coverage of what's going on. We are keeping up with it, we think, although it is changing minute by minute. What is happening in Washington, and a whole lot more coming up on a special Checkpoint after the news.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No, my Heidi, my good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. The American President Donald Trump has moved swiftly to sack the country's Attorney General. It came just hours after Sally Yates sent an email to Justice Department lawyers telling them not to defend Mr. Trump's executive order placing restrictions on people from 7 Muslim-majority countries. From Washington, here's the BBC's David Willis.
President Trump responded swiftly to an act of defiance by the country's top law enforcement official, the White House taking to Twitter to say that Dana Bente, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, would replace the existing Attorney General Sally Yates. Ms. Yates, who was appointed by Barack Obama, told Justice Department lawyers in a letter not to defend Mr. Trump's executive order in court because she was not convinced that it was lawful. Ms. Yates was only days away from being replaced by Mr. Trump's pick for Attorney General, Senator Jeff Sessions, who is awaiting Senate confirmation.
David Willis reporting there. The government here is still trying to find out whether New Zealand dual nationals will be affected by Donald Trump's immigration ban. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull says the United States has promised to exempt Australians with dual nationality from the ban. New Zealand's Foreign Minister Murray McCully says the New Zealand Embassy in Washington is continuing to work urgently to gain further information on how the executive order will be applied. He says the government's working to ensure New Zealand dual nationals are not disadvantaged and that New Zealanders are covered by any exemptions being offered. Mr McCully says while there's still uncertainty, people who require advice regarding travel to America should contact the US Consulate General in Auckland. Atuiti whare Pārimata, ko Chris Bramwell aho.
Extra search and rescue personnel are being brought in to find a missing German tourist on Mount Taranaki. They're concentrating their efforts on the Matakawa track area. The 19-year-old woman was reported missing after she initially stayed behind at the visitor centre when a companion went for a tramp, but wasn't there when her friend returned. Senior Sergeant Thomas McIntyre says police now know she left the North Egmont Visitors Centre car park about 10 o'clock yesterday morning and entered the bush.
We can confirm through CCTV footage that she has entered the national park to go for a walk, and so now we have a good idea of where to start looking effectively.
Thomas McIntyre says further Landsar staff have been called in to help in the search, which is being assisted by the Taranaki rescue helicopter. Tougher visa rules imposed last year appear to have done little to curb foreigners wanting to live in New Zealand. Official figures show migration continues to break new record highs, with more than 70,500 people settling here in 2016. The chair of the New Zealand Association for Migration and Investment, June Ranson, criticised the government's move last year to tighten visa rules. The changes are now under review. With firms continually looking overseas to fill gaps, she's expecting the government to ensure the rules help assist employers. An Auckland real estate agent who sent faeces in the mail after falling out with his employer is fighting to keep working in the profession. Grant Tuck has been in the High Court today seeking an interim order allowing him to continue in his real estate work while he appeals against the cancellation of his licence. The decision's been reserved. In 2015, Mr Tucker was fined and discharged without conviction in the Auckland District Court. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. Sport now, and the Hurricanes wing Corey Jane has hinted his good mate and All Black Israel Dagg is set to join Ben Smith in re-signing with New Zealand Rugby with an eye on the 2019 World Cup. Smith is reportedly set to stay after turning down a French club offer. Smith and All Blacks teammate Dagg are both off contract following the British and Irish Lions tour in June, and both have been linked with big money overseas contracts. But former All Black Jane, who's just returned to the Hurricanes from a stint in Japan, says both Smith and Dagg will stay in New Zealand.
They both played, brilliant last season, so they've still got another couple of years where they can fulfil their All Black dreams, and the money's or whatever it is going to be there for, or the opportunity to try a different team, a different country is going to be there for them, in a couple of years, just like it is now. So, man, it's good on them, see.
Corey Jane there. The New Zealand opening batsman Martin Guptill will miss Thursday's second Chappell-Hadley one-day cricket international against Australia in Napier due to a hamstring injury. Guptill suffered the injury in the Black Caps' narrow win in the series opener in Auckland yesterday. He's been replaced in the squad by Northern District's batsman Dean Brownlee. Athletics New Zealand has scored a coup by enticing Olympic men's shotput champion Ryan Krauser of the United States to compete here. Krauser set an Olympic record in his win in Rio and will line up against New Zealand bronze medalist Tom Walsh and fellow Olympian Jack O'Gill in meets in Christchurch and Auckland next month. That's the news.
A border ban?
This is an executive order that is about the national security of the United States. This tempest in a teacup amongst the chattering classes really doesn't reflect the reality.
Bill English reacts.
We would just expect people travelling on a New Zealand passport not to be caught up in this particular policy change.
Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, how forensic medicine can help you before you die. And after 10, if you think the CIA will stand up to President Trump, think again. This from the CIA's lead interrogator of Saddam Hussein. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the weather, short forecast from Met Service. This takes us through to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday, and for Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine, patchy rain in southern Hawke's Bay tomorrow. Waitomo to Wellington, including the central high country and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy, patchy drizzle and scattered rain tomorrow in the afternoon or evening. Bulla and Westland, occasional rain, could be some heavy falls. Possible thunderstorms in south Westland today and elsewhere in the morning tomorrow or early afternoon, then it should clear up. Fiordland, heavy rain, possibly thundery, easing to showers overnight. Nelson and Marlborough, that's excluding Kaikoura Coast, cloudy period, scattered rain tomorrow, that should clear up later. Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury, mainly fine for the rest of today. Scattered rain develops in southern Canterbury tonight, spreading elsewhere tomorrow, and severe northwesterly gales inland, they should ease tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland northwesterly gales abating about now and rain developing, easing to isolated showers overnight tonight. At the Chatham Islands, cloudy, occasional rain develops tomorrow. It's 5:07.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome, everyone, whether you're listening on the radio or watching us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50, YouTube or the RNZ website. Great to have you with us. We begin tonight with the sacking of Sally Yates. Until a few hours ago, she was the US government's top lawyer. An Obama appointment, she responded to Donald Trump's refugee ban by refusing to uphold it. Questioning its legality in a constitutional sense, she explicitly stated, and I quote, "As long as I am the acting Attorney General, the Department of Justice will not present arguments in defence of the executive order." Trump took her at her word and fired her. Her replacement is expected to be more compliant in his approach to executive orders, but the fact remains an unknown number of the federal lawyers charged with enforcing Trump's executive order don't support it. And Sally Yates was only the last domino to fall today. Let's look back over the hours before it. Our Washington correspondent Kevin McAleese joins us shortly. But first, this report from the ABC's Ann Barker.
It began with protests on American streets. Now the fight against Donald Trump's immigration ban has spread to the courts, boardrooms and even US diplomatic missions around the world. The state of Washington is the first to announce legal action against Donald Trump's administration.
I'm filing a lawsuit today in federal court against President Trump, the Federal Department of Homeland Security, and high-ranking Trump administration officials. It seeks to have key provisions of that executive order declared illegal and unconstitutional. In other words, if successful, this would have the effect of invalidating the president's unlawful action nationwide.
Washington's Attorney General Bob Ferguson is one of 16 state attorneys general who've released a joint statement slamming the immigration ban as un-American and unlawful.
We are a country based on the rule of law, and in a courtroom, it is not the loudest voice that prevails. It's the Constitution. That's why we're a nation of laws. And in our view, the president is not adhering to the Constitution.
In a separate case, the Civil Liberties Union has filed a lawsuit in Virginia on behalf of at least 20 Muslims who live in the US. Its national litigation director is Lena Masri.
The untold story behind the Muslim exclusion ban is that it initiates the expulsion of Muslims that are lawfully residing in the United States. Muslims fleeing persecution in their home countries will be forced to return, despite the fact that they may be likely to be tortured, persecuted, or even executed.
Now, some of the world's biggest companies are joining the fight, saying the immigration ban is bad for business Apple's CEO Tim Cook, in a memo to staff, said the company would not exist without immigration. Google says the ban would make it harder to hire skilled workers from outside the US. Amazon says it's looking at other legal options to challenge the ban, and the heads of eBay, Netflix, Coca-Cola, Etsy, Ford, General Electric and Goldman Sachs have all spoken out against the order. Political scientist Larry Sabato says the level of protest against such a new presidency is unprecedented.
We've never had this before. It usually takes 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years for the level of animosity toward a new president to build to the point where there are widespread demonstrations. But Trump has been in just little over a week.
For a third day, Donald Trump has defended the ban, tweeting, "There's nothing nice about searching for terrorists before they can enter the country. This was a big part of my campaign. Study the world." And he defended the timing of the order, saying if the ban were announced with a 1-week notice, the bad would rush into our country during that week. A lot of bad dudes out there. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer defended the ban in Washington.
This focus on securing our borders and our homeland was obviously a major part of what the president campaigned on, and now he's doing exactly what he told the American people he would do. The president will always put the safety and prosperity of our country first and foremost.
Even the US Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, appointed by Barack Obama, has instructed Justice Department lawyers not to defend the ban while she remains in the job. US diplomats too are speaking out against the order. The BBC says hundreds of US diplomats around the world are set to criticise the ban in a so-called dissent cable for senior State Department officials. And now Los Angeles police are set to defy the ban, with LA's police chief Charlie Beck saying his force will ignore calls to detain undocumented immigrants for deportation. Overseas too, there's growing condemnation of Donald Trump's order. Iraq's parliament has approved retaliatory action to ban US citizens from entering Iraq. Thousands of people have joined protests in Britain, and a petition to block Donald Trump from visiting the UK now has 1.5 million signatures.
That report from the ABC. Our correspondent Kevin McAleese is in Washington. I spoke to him just minutes ago at the end of an extraordinary day.
Yeah, it's been truly dizzying, this administration, since it first crashed onto the scene. It feels like we're months into the Trump presidency era when, in fact, we've just begun the second week. And here we have Monday evening in Washington, D.C., this announcement that Donald Trump has fired the acting US Attorney General Sally Yates. So another big shake-up, the top US prosecutor being knocked off from her position and replaced a new acting US Attorney General already sworn in. And on top of that, he still needs to get the confirmation of the man who will be his permanent US Attorney General, Jeff Sessions.
I'm just looking, Kevin, at the statement out of the White House. It says that Sally Yates has betrayed the Department of Justice by refusing to enforce a legal order designed to protect the citizens of the United States. Of course, she would say she said it explicitly, it's not a legal order. It's at total variance with our Constitution, and I can't enforce it.
Yes, I mean, what she actually didn't do was come out with any specifics. You know, she didn't identify aspects of that order that in particular she was concerned about. But what she hinted at certainly was that there was ambiguity and therefore there was doubt. And whether or not she could, as you know, the top US prosecutor, the head of the DOJ, in good conscience, ask her lawyers to go into court to defend this executive action of Donald Trump. Of course, that's no longer a problem because he's fired her, and he sounds like he's put a man in place. I think Dana Boente. He's going to take the job, and he's already said that he's going to carry out the duties of office to the letter. So, you know, it sounds like Mr. Trump, who is the subject of several legal challenges already over this controversial executive action, this travel ban, will get his representation in court if it comes to that.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? So Washington State is suing him. Lots of people are suing him, but Washington State is mounting what looks like a singularly dedicated and resolute case against him. The acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, has been fired. He's appointed somebody from Virginia that it strikes me that hardly one's even heard of, although he promises to do what he's told, this guy. And as you say, we're only just a week into the Trump presidency. Of course, Trump and his people are saying, hold on a sec, Sally Yates was an Obama appointment. She was playing partisan politics. Is that a fair cop?
Well, she was an Obama appointee, but she was also someone who was held in very high regard, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will be treated with the sort of respect that perhaps you would have had under previous administrations. And this has been a big issue in this Trump administration, has been this failure to sort of carry out these inter-agencies checks and balances. You know, even his choice for Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, we understand, AP were reporting that he was baffled as to why he wasn't actually approached and consulted on this executive action before Donald Trump took pen to paper and wielded his executive authority and brought about, you know, these nationwide protests that have since spread internationally to condemn this ban against these 7 Muslim majority countries, and of course refugees coming in altogether, perhaps indefinitely, for Syrians.
Kevin, one final question, and it has to be a quick one because I know you've got to go elsewhere, but if we look at the division, the people who are strongly speaking out against Trump, there is still a sense that their politics and their allegiances are Democrat. In other words, is anyone who voted for Trump scratching their head now and thinking, what the hell is this man up to?
I think you'll always find them on both sides, but you know, there was a poll out earlier today that actually said 48% of people appreciate the policy, this immigration order policy that Donald Trump has brought in. So maybe that gives you an idea of where people stand on the issue. But Donald Trump campaigned on this. This was a promise. He said from the very start he was going to vet Muslims. In fact, before he went on to say he would be rolling out extreme vetting, he suggested he would ban all Muslims. I mean, he climbed down from that originally, but this was something he promised. So he is turning his campaign rhetoric into reality, and he's doing it within the first fortnight of his administration.
That's Kevin McAleese speaking from Washington a short time ago. We'll have more on this later. We're going to go to Washington State and talk to a reporter who was in the news conference when their Attorney General and their Governor said they are suing Donald Trump. Remarkable times. But back here in New Zealand, the Prime Minister is coming under fire for being too weak in his condemnation, if that's the right word, of the American President Donald Trump's immigration ban. Bill English says while he disagrees with the immigration ban, he does not view it as racist. Meanwhile, there's still confusion about whether an exemption given to Australia, Canada and the UK for dual passport holders also applies to New Zealand. No one seems to know the answer to this. We'll have more later. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Murray McCully, says New Zealand officials are still trying to get clarification from US authorities. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
All eyes are on Mr English as he adds New Zealand's voice to the array of responses from other countries. He says New Zealand does not support President Trump's immigration ban.
And we wouldn't implement it. And I think the most important effect we need to deal with in New Zealand is to ensure that members of our community, Muslims who are here in New Zealand, can be reassured that we are not going to go in that direction.
And Mr English says he does not believe he's out of step with other world leaders.
The tenor of my comments is pretty similar to comments made by leaders of other countries, in fact a number of countries where this is a much bigger issue than it is here.
The Labour leader Andrew Little is critical of that stance.
I think Bill English is being weak and indecisive. I think New Zealanders know, we have a reputation for standing up for humanitarian values. What President Donald Trump is doing is directly contrary to that, and we should not be holding back.
And he disagrees with Mr English's reluctance to call the ban racist.
There's no question this is aimed at all Muslims from particular countries. It doesn't matter whether they have already got approval to enter the US through green cards and student visas and the like.
The Greens co-leader James Shaw would also like to see a much stronger response. He says the risk of offending President Trump in the US is not a reason to tone down New Zealand's response.
Well, I come down fairly strongly on the side of people who think that New Zealand should be a strong voice in this time. I mean, if you look at the kinds of comments that have been made by Angela Merkel of Germany, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, Justin Trudeau of Canada, they have all been very clear and unequivocal about their view on President Trump's policy here.
The spokesperson for the Islamic Women's Council, Anjum Rahman, also wants the Prime Minister to take a stronger position.
This is a real miscarriage of justice. It's against all international conventions and treaties, and it's really important that our government acts strongly now. We would certainly like them to be contacting the Trump administration, as well as making all efforts to contact members of Senate and House of Representatives and ask them to take action against this.
Anjum Rahman says all New Zealanders, not just the Muslim community, are affected by Mr. Trump's policy.
These are issues that will impact a lot of people across the board, and some of these policies that we've seen in the last week, at the moment impacting Mexicans and so on, these things will escalate and impact a lot of people. That's why we're saying it's important for the government to stand up now.
Labour has launched a petition calling for Mr. English to tell President Trump to end the ban when the two leaders do finally manage to speak on the phone. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
So what do New Zealanders think? Has the Prime Minister been strong enough in his criticism of Trump's stance against refugees and immigrants from certain countries? Zach Fleming went to find out.
He could go a bit stronger.
Why would you like to see him go a bit stronger?
Well, I think what Donald Trump's doing is kind of bigoted, racist. So I think he needs to speak out against that sort of thing.
He's a leader, so therefore he should provide some leadership. But in these particular policies, because it's someone else's and it has polarised their nation, what is he supposed to do?
No, he should be objecting a lot more than he has been, because it's very bad what Donald Trump is doing, yeah.
Why do you think it's important for him to object?
It's important because what Donald Trump is doing is incredibly bad, is being divisive in what he's doing.
But why is it important for us to object specifically, or for other countries to object?
Well, because otherwise people can just do whatever they like if people don't object.
Really, I think he pretty much bows to what Donald Trump wants. I think we're a bit of a weak nation against America.
I can see both sides. I think it would be really stressful. You don't want to pick a fight with the world's biggest bully, do you? But, we should be standing up for what we believe in as a country.
Those comments from people in downtown Auckland this afternoon. What do you think? You can text us on 2101. Has the Prime Minister been strong enough in his condemnation of Trump's stance against refugees and immigrants from certain countries? You might think none is required. Would love to hear from you. Text 2101. As Donald Trump's executive order is praised by some, enforced by some, ignored by others, and challenged by some of the top lawyers in the United States, its actual effect remains uncertain to a striking degree. Sam, whose full name we're not using because he's still hoping to get a visa, is a dual citizen. He was born in Iran. He's now a New Zealander with a New Zealand passport. His wife is also a dual citizen, and she's a PhD student who's been invited to speak at a conference in the US. Can they go? Well, as New Zealanders, yes. But to what extent does their Iranian dual citizenship complicate things? Well, it seems no one knows the answer to that, even the people whose job it is to know.
Well, we are not sure. We basically, bottom line, we are not too sure if we can get a visa. We've been told, go to the website, I think it's called Visa Waiver. You go to the website, you put in all the information, and then at the end you will get the confirmation, and where you go. You got a visa to go to US, and that's where we're thinking it's going to go. But then when we went through that website, when we filled in the form, in the middle of the questions, I don't know, question 10, 11, it asked, have you traveled to any of those countries such as Iran, Libya, Iraq? And then we answered yes. And then all of a sudden, the message came out saying, this is not the right application to apply. you need to apply directly through US Embassy. So we thought, all right, so let's just do that. But I asked them, even though if we pay for it, with the new rule now came on board with a prompt policy, are we allowed to apply for this? And then the response to that was, we are not sure. Send us an email, we will get back to you on a new policy because we still haven't been informed with the new policy.
So you don't know whether you're allowed into the United States. The people you're meant to be applying to and dealing with don't know whether you're allowed into the United States. Can I clarify what papers you have? So you were born in Iran, right?
Yes. I have been in Iran around 2 years ago.
Okay. But you have a New Zealand passport.
Yes, and that's where my feeling I was feeling quite upset about the whole story. But again, I was trying to get myself forward because I want to go to meet my family. I want my wife to attend to a conference. As a whole, in general, everything is good about it.
Okay, and everything would normally be good because you would just travel on a New Zealand passport and that would be that. But you have to declare this connection with Iran, and the moment you do that,
that's right,
your situation becomes utterly uncertain. Exactly.
I actually personally called US Embassy. I asked them, what's the policy? Am I able to, are you guys certain that you guys can give me a visa? And the answer to that is they were saying they are not sure. Send us an email, we will respond to it.
Wait a sec, I just want to clarify that because I think this is the issue in a nutshell, isn't it? The US Embassy doesn't actually know and wasn't actually able to tell you what Donald Trump's executive order means.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. Even though I'm a New Zealander, but because I've got a dual nationality, Iranian and New Zealander, therefore, based on the new rule, we still are not allowed to go to US. We are still not able to get the visa.
So that's Sam, who thought they were going to the United States. His wife asked to speak at a conference. They bought their tickets and paid for them. It now seems they can't go, despite the fact that he and his wife both are New Zealanders with New Zealand passports. The US Embassy has issued a statement advising dual nationals not to schedule visa appointments and not to pay visa fees as they are banned from entering the United States. However, dual citizens from the UK, Australia and Canada have since been exempted and will be allowed to enter the US. And lots of people now are raising also the example of people born in places other than Israel now travelling on Israeli passports. Lots of Israelis, of course, have moved there from elsewhere in the Middle East. For New Zealand dual citizens, though, nobody knows if they'll be allowed in. In a statement today, Foreign Minister Murray McCully said the New Zealand Embassy in Washington is working to ensure New Zealand dual nationals are not disadvantaged and are covered by exemptions being offered, but clearly that's a work in progress. We phoned several travel agencies and airlines to ask what their official advice is. Air New Zealand, Jetstar, Qantas, Flight Centre and House of Travel told us they're referring all people to the US Embassy. House of Travel's retail director Brent Thomas said it's still not clear whether New Zealand dual nationals will be turned away at the border.
There are certain grey areas around the order, that is, now as it stands, because it depends on people's status, including things such as whether they hold a green card, which is going to be done on a case-by-case basis as well. So you can't just, there's not a blanket, clear-cut position, and we definitely need to work through it on an individual basis. And part of that will also mean being in contact with the American embassy to see what advice that they have on a case-by-case basis.
So, in short, confusion reigns. We will be back on this story after the news at 6. Let's change the subject now, though. Several former employees of the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority are being investigated following allegations they tried to use their positions for personal financial advantage. 3 men from the now defunct government authority have been accused of trying to arrange property deals through their own company for a finder's fee. The minister in charge of Christchurch's rebuild is calling the allegations damaging for New Zealand's reputation. Maya Burry reports.
Fairfax has named the men as Sarah's manager of the Greater Christchurch Investment Strategy, Murray Cleverley, and 2 investment facilitators, Gerard Gallagher and Simon Nikoloff. It reported they were all shareholders in the company Project and Investment Management, in which Mr Gallagher tried to facilitate a property deal with investors and copied Mr Cleverly and Mr Nikoloff into correspondence. Today, the minister supporting Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Jerry Brownlee, refused to go into details about the allegations, but says they are deeply disappointing.
It is undeniable that there was a company formed for a purpose by 3 people who were employed by Sarah. So that alone is enough to investigate the activity, because that activity would be unacceptable.
Fairfax quoted the 3 men as saying they were entitled to do private deals, and the company they set up to do so was formed with the full knowledge of their employers. The State Services Commission and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet are investigating. In a statement, the department said it would be analysing all of the relevant material before deciding if the men had been conflicted in undertaking property dealings.
In keeping with the codes of conduct applying to all public sector personnel, the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet would not expect that any individuals working with the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority to have gained a private benefit from any external business dealings connected to their work in the public sector.
Labour's Canterbury MP Megan Woods says there needs to be a full and thorough investigation, and if appropriate, someone needs to be held accountable. Ms Woods says given Jerry Brownlee was the minister in charge of Sarah, he should have known what was going on.
All along, Christchurch people have been told by the Minister, by Jerry Brownlee, to be patient in terms of the Central City recovery. But right under his nose, senior staff in his organisation were setting up a side business with a clear conflict of interest.
Mr Brownlee says the government is taking the matter seriously.
But I want to make it clear that we're not leaving any stone unturned in this investigation. Take it very seriously, because these are the sort of allegations that are reputationally damaging for the whole of New Zealand.
The department says because Sarah was disestablished in April last year, documents will need to be retrieved from archives before they can be analysed, and this will take some time. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
Maya tried to reach Murray Cleverly, Gerard Gallagher and Simon Nikoloff today for comment. Mr Gallagher and Mr Nikoloff both work for Otakaro Limited, who told us it would be inappropriate to make a comment while the situation is under investigation. Of course, we will keep an eye on this story as it develops. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the programme, a woman almost crushed to death in the Christchurch earthquake says it's murderously cavalier for Wellington's council not to cordon off weak and vulnerable buildings, and should an official white chair memorial to the victims of the 2011 Christchurch quake be moved? We'd love to hear from you on those stories. Bill English, Donald Trump, anything you choose. Lots of people contacting us and say, hey, why aren't we as tough on Australia and their immigration policies and attitudes towards refugees as we are on Donald Trump? They are our near neighbour. Lots of people raising that point. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and of course email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Coming up to 27 minutes to 6, which sounds like the perfect time to go to Wellington and Paul Brennan.
Thank you, John. In our headlines, just hours after America's top lawyer defied Donald Trump's order banning travellers from 7 Muslim minority countries, the new president has sacked Sally Yates. She emailed Justice Department lawyers advising them not to support the ban. And Ms. Yates said she was not convinced the order was lawful. An Obama appointee, she was just days away from being replaced by Mr. Trump's choice, Jeff Sessions. In New Zealand, the government is still investigating the status of New Zealand nationals going to the US. The Australian Prime Minister has secured an agreement with the Trump administration to exempt dual nationals from across the Tasman. But Foreign Minister Murray McCully says New Zealand's embassy in Washington is still trying to ensure New Zealanders are not disadvantaged by the ban. The search for a 19-year-old German woman missing on Mount Taranaki is being beefed up, with extra search and rescue crew being brought in. The woman was last seen in the Visitors Centre car park yesterday morning. The Taranaki rescue helicopter has joined the search. The number of foreigners wanting to live in New Zealand has not abated despite tougher visa rules. More than 70,000 people settled here last year. The chair of the New Zealand Association for Migration and Investment criticised the government's tightening of the rules last year as firms continually look overseas to fill job gaps. The changes are now under review. And an Auckland real estate agent who posted feces after falling out with his employer is fighting to keep his job. Grant Tuck has been in the High Court today seeking an interim order allowing him to continue his real estate work while he appeals against the cancellation of his licence. The judge's decision has been appealed. Those are the headlines. Our next news and sport update will be at 6 o'clock.
Thanks so much, Paul. Business news coming up next, but you would have heard, Paul, in those headlines talk about the tougher visa rules imposed last year, appearing to have done little to curb foreigners wanting to live in New Zealand. So we're going to look at that at greater depth because we have a story here from our economics correspondent, Patrick O'Mara.
The number of people coming to live and work in New Zealand last year was more than 70,500 people. The chair of the New Zealand Association for Migration and Investment, June Ranson, says one employer told her that locals have the wrong work ethic and he's now looking to hire up to 30 people from overseas.
He said the attitude was very wrong with these people, and he said he had a solid week's induction program that he used for the people he bring in, and he said it's almost as if a lack of interest is there. He has no alternative but to have to look offshore.
June Ranson was critical of the government's move last year to tighten visa rules, saying it was a knee-jerk reaction that could stunt growth. The government's having a deeper look at the rules, and she's hoping for a sensible response that will allow firms to fill their gaps.
I'm optimistic. I do think that sanity will prevail and they will bring something by way of a policy which will be more in keeping with what New Zealand needs.
The policies of American President Donald Trump and uncertainty over Britain's exit from Europe are also sparking interest in New Zealand. Shay Peters, the Wellington director of the professional recruitment consultancy Robert Walters, says that includes returning New Zealanders.
We've probably seen a slight increase in this. I was in London conducting a seminar in September, and there was definitely more of a positive sentiment about moving back to New Zealand, which only helps, complement the local skill set that we have here.
While New Zealand remains an attractive destination, Westpac's senior economist Satish Ranchod points out the strong net migration also reflects New Zealanders staying put.
We're looking very attractive to those migrants from offshore, and it's important to remember that much of that strength has been driven by New Zealanders choosing to remain onshore, and that's a factor that we think can continue in the near term.
Separately, tourist numbers hit a record 3.5 million in 2016, led by Australians, who made up 40% of all visitors. And Kiwis returned the favour. New Zealanders took a record number of trips overseas, mainly across the Tasman. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
Thanks, Patrick. Let's turn to business news now with our business editor, Giles Beckford, who sits, I think, in the Wellington office not too far from Patrick. Is that right, Giles?
He's done a runner. He's been and gone. Yeah.
Is he? Well, look, I'm fascinated by this because my notes say we are going to discuss speculation that there is an announcement due on the future of the Reserve Bank Governor, Graham Wheeler. Is that the case?
Well, the word we hear from inside both Parliament and the bank, and it's percolating around financial markets, is that there will be an announcement before next Thursday. That will be the first monetary policy statement from the RBNZ. Clearly, they want to actually lay it out pretty early in the year as to whether the governor's going to carry on and seek a second term, or whether in fact he'll be granted a second term, or whether in fact he's just going to be a one-term governor. The word we hear, and I think the speculation is largely that he will not get a second term, will not want a second term. We won't speculate on whether he's been pushed or whether he would jump, but frankly, he's had interesting times, as the Chinese would say, for his 5-year term. You remember he came in here with New Zealand just recovering from a recession. We had the Christchurch earthquake and the aftermath of that, and the scramble by government and authorities to try and rebuild the city and get it back up and running. At the same time, we had the rest of the world really not going very far. The international growth outlook wasn't that good, but then we had a boom in dairy. And you remember we rocketed up to almost lifetime highs in 2013-14. There was the dairy boom there. That was looking good. And he thought, because remember the Reserve Bank governor's job is essentially to keep inflation within a 1 to 3% target band. Right, 2% is the magic number that they aim for. Well, like the rest of the world, New Zealand, in fact, had very low inflation, But he thought that with the economy starting to pick up pace, that there would be stronger inflation pressures, and he started to raise interest rates. Central banks do this. They try to be a bit preemptive. They take the initiative to try and just keep a lid on inflation so it doesn't get out of control, and it comes back to bite you in the bum a few years later because you weren't quick enough. But then, of course, the rest of the world was going soft. Dairy boom became a bust. Oil prices fell. Inflation wasn't just low, it was actually missing in action. So he had to cut all those rates, all the rate rises that he gave, he had to take away, and he had to cut rates. So certainly a bit topsy-turvy. He's been criticised for the way he communicates. Because he's a reasonably low-profile governor, he seemed at one stage to say, well, we won't be cutting rates. And then, of course, the very next week, that was precisely what he did, and that drew a lot of flack. And the government, usually ministers do not comment on the performance of central bank governors. But if you remember, Bill English as finance minister, John Key as prime minister, both commented on the way the Reserve Bank was, should we say, approaching the task of getting inflation back into the target band and the effect it was having on the wider economy. That's quite unusual. So put all those things together, and I think that possibly Graham Wheeler will say, well, it was a salutary, an interesting 5 years, but that's it. And the government can announce that it's now on the hunt for a new Reserve Bank governor.
Yeah. Look, I was at one of the stand-ups where John Key had it, I think probably a bit of a go at Graham Wheeler, relatively speaking. And of course, the government was coming under immense pressure on housing then and was looking to blame sort of anyone they possibly could. So Graham Wheeler, the Auckland Council, the Resource Management Act, everything was copping it. But it was unusual to hear Graham Wheeler singled out like that. Who would replace him if he does go?
Well, the practice in the past has essentially been to find somebody from outside, a New Zealander, but somebody from outside of the bank. Look inside the bank, first of all. There are a couple of quite suitably qualified, reasonable potential candidates. These Grant Spencer and Jeff Baskand, who are the two deputy governors. There's the chief economist and assistant governor, John McDermott, who's a former chief economist at what was the old National Bank of New Zealand. Looking outside of the bank, you'd have to say the short odds favour Adrian Orr, who's a former chief economist at the bank and deputy governor, but he's the one who currently heads the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. I'd have to say that I don't know whether he wants to take a big pay cut, because that's what he would have to do from his current position. He would be a breath of fresh air. He would be a central bank governor as we have never seen before. And I say that from personal experience, from dealing with him over many years. Other potential candidates, Rod Carr, he's a former deputy governor, and Murray Sherwin, who's currently heads the Productivity Commission. He's a former deputy governor as well. So they're potential outside candidates. They've been out, they've been through something different. They might want to bring somebody back in. I would say the long odds are that they look overseas. Now, they could actually go and just find somebody different, completely unknown to New Zealand, but with good credentials. That's a possibility, but I think that might be just a step too adventurous for the government and the bank at board.
Thanks, Charles. Quickly, before you go, the markets today.
Top 50 index, the share market still feeling the effect of the Monday night massacre with Donald Trump, down 35 points at 7,051. New Zealand dollar 72.9 US cents and 96.3 Australian.
Charles Beckford, our business editor. Thanks so much, Charles. Let's go to the story of a woman who came terrifyingly close to being crushed to death in the Christchurch earthquake in 2011. She says it's murderously cavalier for Wellington's council not to cordon off weak or vulnerable buildings. There are 4 buildings in Wellington, 2 of which are in the CBD, that are red stickered because strengthening has not been done within a council allocated time frame. Jacob McSqueenie looks at this.
The Two Myths building and the Abermail Hotel are 2 of Wellington's 4 red-stickered buildings, with warnings not to approach, but with no cordon. People walk and drive past regularly, especially during peak times. Anne Bauer says it was one of those buildings that fell and destroyed a bus she was travelling on in 2011 and killed every passenger apart from herself and one other who was paralysed.
These people had nothing to do with the buildings that crushed them. They weren't inside. They hadn't taken the choice to go inside. They hadn't signed an implied contract of going inside a building. They were just walking or driving past. So Christchurch made some pretty serious mistakes in getting back to business as usual too quickly after September.
She says Wellington's council must stop people being anywhere near the Two Myths and Abermale buildings.
City Council has much more of a duty of care to the passers-by than to the occupants of a building. I would think that it's a fairly severe dereliction of duties to not close off the street if they know the building to be dangerous, especially after Christchurch.
Iona Pennant is the council's portfolio leader of infrastructure and sustainability. She says the owners of the Two Myths building have not been in communication with the council, but she understands the building is safe for people to walk in front of. She says the red sticker is there to show strengthening hasn't been done in time.
It's because we set deadlines, basically, so that you say that you do them, and then people haven't been able to come to a solution. That doesn't mean that it is inherently a more dangerous building. So it just really does depend on the kind of quake and where it is.
All 4 of Wellington's red-stickered buildings are City Council Heritage classified. Iona Pennant says that poses challenges to the owners as upgrades are complicated and expensive.
People do see that these buildings have economic value. They want to do business in them, they want to live in them. So some owners may be dragging their feet, but some people will be facing affordability issues, which is why central government needs to come to the party and look at how they can support building owners further, and the council needs to do more as well.
Walking past the building earlier today, painter Bruce Gallagher says it's time the city did away with heritage buildings and prioritised safety.
The historical trust of it all, to replace a facade like that again is just here with all the new facade and that on there. Look at the work they've had to do to strengthen that, but you still have old concrete out there. It's old, it's wearing out, it doesn't have technology like we have today. It's just sometimes we've got to get rid of history and make new history. And that's what's happening in Christchurch. It's going to be a whole new history down there.
Next door to the Two Myths building, Christopher Brown is the managing director of public relations agency Sputnik. He says he regularly walks past the red sticker despite it saying do not approach.
If they think that, why do they let people approach it? But I don't. I'm quite comfortable approaching it and we've had big earthquakes here. I think if anything's going to fall off, it would have already fallen off. It doesn't have anything overhanging sidewalk, so I feel comfortable approaching it.
The owner-operator of the fishing store on the other side of the Two Myths building, Steve Reed, says the building is an eyesore and it is a disaster waiting to happen.
No, I don't think it's a great thing to be there at all by any stretch of the imagination. I think the sooner they resolve it, but unfortunately there seems to be no pressure for it because, yeah, it will be a safety concern at some stage, and unfortunately does someone have to get injured before they do something about it, because at the moment they're doing nothing about it and haven't done for quite some time.
Steve Reed says earthquake-prone buildings cannot be left untouched for several years, and council should be putting pressure on owners to get strengthening done. For Checkpoint, Ko Jacob McSweeney, Tene.
Well, let's go from that discussion in Wellington to what actually happened in Christchurch. Should an official white chair memorial to the victims of the 2011 quake be moved? That question has divided the families of the quake victims. As the 6th anniversary of the quake approaches next month, made up of 185 empty chairs, one for each person lost, the work currently sits over the road from the former CTV building, which remains largely bare. That site. Conan Young reports on this.
The chairs have stood for 5 years as a poignant reminder of those who lost their lives in the quake. Their future is in doubt, however, as the land they sit on has been earmarked for a new stadium. Mary Ann Jackson was working behind the ground floor reception desk when the earthquake hit and ran from the building as it collapsed behind her, killing 115 people. She'd like to see the chairs stay where they are or move over the road to the CTV site.
I mean, you drive past there, there's always people in there looking. You know, it's a symbol and it's a reminder of how people lost their lives that dreaded day.
Mary Ann Jackson says the artwork, which has never been officially signed off by authorities, has become an unofficial memorial.
Oh, I'm not sure whether it's because they're painted white and they're all just there in a row and they're all shapes and sizes. And I love it how every year on Memorial Day they always put flowers around. It's lovely, it looks great.
However, Marnell Casey, whose wife died in the CTV building, says while he appreciates the gesture, moving the chairs onto the site would be inappropriate.
I like the idea that we have a garden and some life, because I would like to think that my wife is still giving to the city, still making the city more beautiful. And the chairs represent something static, represent something empty. it's more sad.
And Marnell Casey isn't alone. He says the government, which owns the land, conducted a survey of family members, which found most were opposed to placing the chairs on the site where so many people died.
The site itself is very sensitive site, is very sacred. There are people who still there, probably. We couldn't find even trace of their DNA, just disappeared in the ground. There are many different cultures. They also don't like the idea of chairs.
The artist behind the work, Peter Magendi, says he was inspired by the death of his best friend's son-in-law in the building. He says it's been a privilege to be part of giving people a place to remember those who were lost.
It's provided a place that in some ways for some people has been quite healing. I met a young guy there, he bikes in there. He bikes in there to sit on a chair and talk to his mum.
He says the CTV site is the most appropriate place for the work to now go because it's a place where everybody can reflect, not just the families of those who died.
So absolutely everybody will one day experience what it's like to have an empty chair at their table. That was the idea. I mean, I don't know, some people have said, it's disrespectful to represent somebody with a chair. It's a little bit different than that.
Marnell Casey, though, says a permanent memorial to the victims of the CTV collapse should be completed within the next year. He expects it will be simple and include a garden and perhaps a water feature, but no chairs. In Ōtautahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Thank you, Conan. David Shearer has arrived in South Sudan and begun his new job there as head of UN operations in the country. The former Labour Party leader and MP for Mount Albert accepted the job in December after being chosen for it by UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. That means a by-election in Mount Albert, of course, where campaigning is currently underway, and it also means working a long way from home. This morning we went to that home in Auckland to join his wife Anushka Meyer in talking to him via Skype in South Sudan. David Shearer arrived in South Sudan 11 days ago, chief of mission in a country torn apart by civil war, death toll perhaps as many as 300,000, and internal displacement.
I hope it works. I mean, the other day it didn't work.
Yes, South Sudan. Warmly welcomed on the tarmac, the UN's task here is immense. In short, helping a new nation realise the hopes that accompanied its independence from Sudan in 2011.
I know it's going to be challenging, but I feel that the South Sudanese people deserve to have a state that is functioning and it looks after them and is stable and it provides for their peace and their prosperity.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Good, a bit tired, but other than that, all right.
New Zealand is a long way away, and at home, Anushka Meyer, lawyer and David Shearer's wife, is keeping in touch by Skype this morning with a couple of guests. Hey, David.
I've got John Campbell here and Brad, who's...
G'day, John. How you doing?
This is life now, minus the journalists as a rule, the family home in Auckland, the UN compound in South Sudan's capital. The distance is roughly 15,000 k's, but the work makes it worthwhile. And the former MP for Mount Albert doesn't mind admitting it. David, you love this, don't you? I mean, your eyes are sparkling.
Yeah, no, I do. I get a buzz out of it, I have to say, John. Yeah, well, it's incredibly tangible, I mean, it's everything you do in it. Well, no, that's not quite true, but what you're doing is making a substantive difference. We've got at the moment, those troops there, but all the people that got caught up in the violence all ran to us. So we've got about 230,000 people living with us or right beside us in kind of makeshift camps because we provide the protection. And if we didn't do that, they would, many of them would have been killed. So, thousands of them would have been killed. So the fact that we've done that, and we're feeding, the UN's feeding, well, the aim is to feed 5 million people this coming year. I mean, it's just enormous.
South Sudan is not quite 6 years old, a new country plagued by old enmities and by a staggering absence of infrastructure. Juba is the capital, that's where the UN is based, but getting elsewhere...
The road from Juba up to, for example, Malakal in the north, is at the moment taking it's 1,000 kilometres and it's taking 10 to 12 to 14 days to be able to do the trip.
Wow.
So resupply for these guys, is tough as bones. So anyway, there's just huge logistical problems. There's only, I found out today, somebody said, there's only 500 kilometres of tarmac road in South Sudan.
We sit in the family home, a world away. There is news to be caught up on after Auckland's long weekend.
How are things there?
Good. We've had a great weekend, beautiful weather, went up north.
But the lawyer in Auckland and the UN mission head in Juba understand work like this happens a long way away, and to do it, you have to be there.
It's difficult, it has its moments, but I think at the end of the day, Dave is in a job in which he can, do something, and he's using all his skills, both his political skills and his humanitarian skills. And I think that's quite unique in this type of job, and he has them and he can apply them, and I think that's a really positive thing. So for me, it's I'm pleased to see him looking happy.
Tomorrow, David Shearer is travelling west, a place called Wow, where life is tough and the UN's task is a big one. Amongst the people he's meeting, a military commander.
Trying to build a consensus around where we need to go in terms of the peace process, and that's not just me. That's me with others. And particularly the African Union, who really needs to take the lead on it. So in a sense, what we're doing is trying to support and shepherd a bit in whatever that process, and provide resources for it actually. And if we can do that, and if we can get the peace process on the way, then things start to fall into place. But that is incredibly difficult at the moment. So in the meantime, we carry on doing the humanitarian work and all that sort of thing. But really the end goal is trying to bring about peace.
David Shearer talking via Skype from South Sudan to his home in Auckland this morning, shot by Bradley White, and we'd really like to thank UNICEF and the UN for those striking photos from South Sudan. For the first time, the SPCA has called on pet stores to stop selling cats and kittens that have not been desexed in the hope of mitigating unwanted litters. With the breeding season well and truly underway, thousands of unwanted cats and stray kittens have ended up in the care of the society around the country. Today we went to the Auckland SPCA, which has about 200 cats and kittens and the same amount in foster care. Our reporter Sally Murphy spoke with General Manager Tracy Dunn, who says on some days they desex up to 40 cats.
I always live in hope that I'll get up one day and go, gosh, this year's been really easy, but it never is, surprisingly. And even though we're doing such a rampant desexing drive out in the community, we feel that we're making such a difference in desexing everything that we adopt out. Every year we just all look at each other and go, God, it's just as busy as it has been every other year.
How much of an issue are pet stores selling undersexed cats? Do you guys see that quite a bit?
Yeah, we do. It's a massive issue. It's a massive community issue, and it's a massive welfare issue as well. Because basically, as soon as that cat gets adopted and goes out into the community, if it's got a responsible owner, then yes, they potentially will get it desexed, especially if it's part of the adoption package, but not that many pet shops do that. So basically they'll sell the cat, take the money, and basically it's, that's their responsibility done. And if the owner doesn't get the cat desexed, then it will start breeding in 5 to 6 months, and it will breed and breed and breed until somebody does something about it. And all of those kittens that are born have to find home somewhere.
So why do you think people aren't getting cats desexed?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is cost, and realistically, if you look at the cost of getting a cat desexed through a private vet, it's actually not unreasonable. It's quite a reasonable price. Places like us offer some low-cost desexing depending on what the situation is for the owner. There are lots of vet clinics out in the community that run some really good desexing campaigns and offer free desexing at times of the year. So I think cost is one, and I think people quite often intend to get their animal desexed. But it kind of, time ticks by and they get busy and it's not a priority because it's just a little kitten. And then all of a sudden that little kitten is 5 months old and pregnant. Come to the SPCA and adopt a cat who desperately needs a home and is already desexed and everything is done, and you just pay one fee and it's a one-stop shop basically. And you just have to pay for the ongoing care for annual vaccinations. That's, go to other rescue agencies. There's lots of other rescue agencies out there that do similar things. They desex before they adopt out. and they're doing their best to help us to sort out what's going on in the community.
SPCA General Manager Tracy Dunn, some seriously cute kittens in the pictures with that story. Pet Central, Pet World and Animates pet shops all told us they only sell desexed and vaccinated cats, which will delight the SPCA. Of course, lots of feedback coming in. We're going to look at Bill English and his response to Donald Trump and his refugee ban. Bill English has been gutless in response to Donald Trump's racist anti-immigrant policies. Remember when New Zealand had a spine, we stood up against apartheid and French nuclear testing. A big fail for Bill, says Ewan. But this listener says, I think Bill English is taking a reasonable position. He disagrees with the Trump policy but doesn't need to grandstand about it. Globalisation is a complicated issue, as discussions about the TPPA have shown. Change is always difficult, and the US is trying to deal with an increasingly challenging world, and I don't see how countries like New Zealand moralising over every step or misstep help anybody. And this person says, as someone who's been declined entry in the past, I'm a dual New Zealand UK citizen, I can pass on my experience of the US government. Even if you have a visa, if in doubt, don't go. 6 o'clock on Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. I'm Paul Brennan. The American President Donald Trump has fired the federal government's top lawyer, accusing her of betrayal after she instructed Justice Department attorneys to stop defending his immigration ban in the courts. The move came just hours after Acting Attorney General Sally Yates said she was not convinced Mr. Trump's executive order closing the country's borders to people from 7 Muslim-majority countries was legal. Here's our Washington correspondent, Simon Marks.
President Trump wasted no time. Just hours after Sally Yates told Justice Department officials to stop defending court challenges to his immigration ban, he fired her. A White House statement accused her of being weak on borders and very weak on illegal immigration, and called her an Obama appointee who had betrayed the government. Others see things differently and say the president has directly interfered with the independence of the Justice Department. The move deepens the crisis sparked by his immigration ban, now facing growing criticism from many of his fellow Republicans. Simon Marks, RNZ News, Washington.
Sally Yates was appointed as Deputy Attorney General under Barack Obama, but was asked by Mr. Trump to temporarily take over until his pick, Jeff Sessions, is confirmed by the Senate. An Iranian man with dual citizenship in New Zealand says American officials cannot tell him if he will be allowed to enter that country. The government here says it's still seeking clarification on whether New Zealand dual nationals will be affected. Sam told Checkpoint his wife, a PhD student and also a dual national, has been invited to speak at a conference in the US, but is unsure whether she'll be able to go.
I actually personally called US Embassy. I asked them what's the policy, am I able to, are you guys certain that you guys can give me a visa? And the answer to that is, they were saying they are not sure. Send us an email, we will respond to it.
Sam was born in Iran and is now a New Zealand citizen. Tougher visa rules imposed last year appear to have done little to curb foreigners wanting to live in New Zealand. Official figures show migration continued to hit record levels, with more than 70,500 people settling here in 2016. The chair of the New Zealand Association for Migration and Investment, June Ranson, was critical of the government's move to tighten visa rules last year, saying it was a knee-jerk reaction that could stunt growth. Now the government's taking a deeper look at the rules. She's hoping for a sensible response that will allow firms to fill their staffing gaps.
I'm optimistic. I do think that sanity will prevail and they will bring something by way of a policy which will be more in keeping with what New Zealand needs.
June Ranson. Analysts expect immigration to remain a key driver of the economy this year. The Energy Minister is considering launching an inquiry into widening petrol price margins. Official figures show the gap between the cost of fuel and what retailers charge has more than doubled since 2004 to more than 30 cents a litre. The Minister, Judith Collins, says she met with officials today and expects to make further announcements shortly. She says ensuring there is a competitive market is the best way to keep fuel costs down, and she's disappointed fuel margins are going up. A proposal to move Christchurch's White Chair Memorial onto the site of the CTV building collapse is being opposed by some families. The collection of 185 empty chairs, one for each victim of the quakes, sits opposite the site, but will eventually have to move as it's the location for the planned stadium. The artist behind the work wants them cast in metal and placed on the site itself. However, Man Al-Kaisi, whose wife died in the building, says this would be inappropriate.
I like the idea that we have a garden and some life, because I would like to think that my wife is still giving to the city, still making the city more beautiful. And the chairs represent something static, represent something empty. It's more sad.
Man Al-Kaisi says a survey of family members found most were opposed to placing the chairs on the site. An Auckland real estate agent who sent feces in the mail is fighting to keep working in the profession. Grant Tucker's been in the High Court today, seeking an interim order allowing him to continue his real estate work while he appeals against the cancellation of his licence. Sarah Robson has more.
Mr. Tucker's lawyer told the court his past behaviour didn't affect clients and the public was not at risk. But the lawyer for the Real Estate Agents Authority said Mr. Tucker's business had been reduced to almost zero, so not being able to work ahead of the appeal would make little difference. The decision's been reserved. In 2015, Mr. Tucker was fined and discharged without conviction in the Auckland District Court over the faeces incident. He also sent soiled sanitary pads and condoms after falling out with his former employer. Call Sarah Robson aho.
It's 6:05. On to sport, the Penrith Rugby League Club wants the NRL Auckland Nines scrapped. The Panther Chief Executive, Brian Fletcher, has labelled the pre-season competition as an unnecessary risk to players. He's also concerned about the impact of it on players who have been recovering from injury in the pre-season. Fletcher says trial matches rather than the Nines would be better preparation for the NRL season.
I haven't heard anybody in the last 3 months give me a positive why you'd want to go to the Nines. Like, it's got flaws in it. Compensation clause for a start, players getting injured, ruining that team's chances in the competition. Could even ruin your state of origin side.
Penrith Chief Executive Brian Fletcher. The future of Chiefs midfielder Charlie Ngatai remains unclear as he continues to battle the symptoms of a serious concussion. The one-test All Blacks suffered a head knock against the Highlanders in May and hasn't played since. The Chiefs coach, Dave Rennie, says Ngatai still isn't back into full training and could miss the entire competition. Meanwhile, the All Blacks halfback Tawera Kerr-Barlow has confirmed he's considering a move to French club Toulon. Kerr-Barlow is off contract at the end of the season and could follow teammate Aaron Cruden to France after the first five signed a lucrative 3-year deal with Montpellier. And the St. Louis Cardinals have been ordered to pay $3 million in damages by Major League Basketball and will forfeit their first 2 picks in the 2017 draft after illegal computer hacking of the Houston Astros. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Myanmar, a model modern democracy. Unless you're a Muslim, in which case it's in danger of becoming a blueprint for 21st century genocide. Matthew Smith's been watching for some time. We have a window on the world of cricket in the Middle East, the stickiest of wickets. And this week's pundit, our economist Brian Easton, peers into that can of worms known as income distribution on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now from our Met Service. It takes us through to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine. Patchy rain in southern Hawke's Bay tomorrow, though. Waitomo to Wellington, that includes the central high country and Wairadapa. Mostly cloudy, patchy drizzle, scattered rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. Bulla and Westland, occasional rain, heavy with possible thunderstorms in southern Westland for the rest of today and elsewhere tomorrow morning and early in the afternoon, then clearing up. Fiordland, heavy rain, possibly thundery, easing to showers overnight. Nelson and Marlborough, excluding Kaikoura Coast, cloudy periods, scattered rain tomorrow. Clearing later. Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury, mainly fine for the rest of today. Scattered rain develops in southern Canterbury tonight, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Severe northwesterly gales, inland easing in the morning tomorrow, Wednesday. Otago and Southland, northwesterly gales abating about now. Rain develops, easing to isolated showers overnight, and for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, occasional rain developing tomorrow. It's 8.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul. You're fired. That was Donald Trump's response today to the US government's top lawyer after Sally Yates refused to uphold the president's new travel restrictions targeting 7 Muslim-majority nations. Basically, she said they weren't constitutional and she couldn't enforce them. Mr. Trump has already replaced her with Dana Bente, the US attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. More on him later. He's also dismissed the acting director of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. The backlash to President Trump's executive orders continued as an internal Homeland Security document seen by Reuters indicated a reprieve for certain refugees. Nathan Frandino reports.
It is reckless.
Democrats blasting President Donald Trump's immigration orders on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court Monday, continuing their fight to reverse his order banning all refugees and blocking citizens from 7 Muslim countries from entering the U.S. In a dramatic sign of the deepening divide, late Monday Trump fired acting U.S. Attorney General Sally Yates after she instructed Justice Department lawyers not to defend the president's order after concluding they did not comply with U.S. law. It was the first such case since 1973, when then Attorney General Elliot Richardson resigned under President Richard Nixon after refusing his order to dismiss the special prosecutor in the Watergate probe. Protests erupting again Monday evening in the nation's capital after travelers were detained, deported, and in some cases blocked from boarding flights to the U.S. over the weekend. An internal Department of Homeland Security document seen by Reuters on Monday said an exception was granted to some 872 refugees. A source saying those refugees were considered in transit and had already been cleared for resettlement before the ban took effect. The document also said more than 735 people had been pulled aside for questioning in U.S. airports, more than the 109 President Trump claimed on Twitter. Another blow coming from the State Department, where the New York Times said at least 100 Foreign Service officials had signed a memo disagreeing with Trump's travel ban.
Welcome back.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer dismissing the memo and those behind it.
And these career bureaucrats have a problem with it? I think that they should either get with the program or they can go.
Spicer adding that the White House remains confident that it will prevail in the legal and political fight against the orders. Also Monday, former President Obama taking the rare step of weighing in, saying through a spokesman that he was heartened by the political activism on the issue.
So Barack Obama weighing in New Zealand, the Prime Minister Bill English has come under fire for being too weak in his criticism of the US ban. The Greens say his response hasn't been strong enough. Labour leader Andrew Little says Mr English has been weak and indecisive. We heard from Aucklanders earlier. What do Wellingtonians think about Bill English and his stance on this? Logan Church went out to ask them.
He's made a respectable comment about it. That means he can still have lines of communication open and yet still make his opposition clear. Sometimes you have to be measured in your responses, and I think he has been appropriately measured.
I think he should be opposed to it, and definitely, but I suppose you've got to respect the fact that America voted for him.
We should be just worrying about our own country, really. Muslims should be the last thing on our list. We should be embracing them and bringing them into the country. That's my opinion.
No, I think it's disgraceful. I think Bill English should be doing more. New Zealand has to step back from America. They are not our principal trading partners. We can afford to live without them.
Let's go back to the US. In Seattle, Washington State's Attorney General announced he is suing President Trump. The announcement was made at an extraordinary media conference in which the Attorney General was joined by State Governor Jay Inslee, who criticised the inhumanity of the President's executive order and said, and I quote, "You do not back down to bullies." Martha Bellal was at the news conference for Associated Press, and her description of it has been used by newspapers and news websites throughout the world.
Washington is the first state to actually take this kind of action. There have been other lawsuits filed on behalf of some of the individuals, but the state of Washington is standing up and saying this action was unconstitutional. The order is unconstitutional on a number of grounds.
And so you have the Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who was making the kind of legal case on behalf of Washington State. And then you have a very strong performance by the Governor, Jay Inslee. What was he saying?
Oh, he was pretty, he did have some strong words. He basically said that people have the right to not be discriminated against based on their religion. He felt strongly that this was a cruel act, that it discriminates based on faith, and it was un-American, and he even encouraged people to continue their resistance to some of the actions that the president has been taking. He said this is not a reality TV show. This is real, and he called it even a train wreck. And he said that he lives on Bainbridge Island, which is one of the places where they rounded up some of the Japanese and put them in internment camps. He said our nation can't sacrifice its liberty based on fear.
I'm reading once again from your copy. This is un-American, it is wrong, and it will not stand. That's the governor. Of course, the legal case is what's important, because the political case, whilst it's absolutely fascinating, Trump is president, and so the politics are kind of over for the foreseeable future. But what case does Attorney General Bob Ferguson take? In other words, how does it work? What happens next?
Well, he hasn't filed it yet. He's filing it this afternoon. Today is Monday in the U.S. And he will file a complaint which lays out the different points that he believes are in the executive order that are unconstitutional. He's also filing what's called a temporary restraining order, which, if the judge grants it, it means that everything will stop. It just puts everything on hold while all these questions are being answered by the courts.
And what court do you file that in? That's in the federal court, is it?
It's in the federal court system. So as soon as it goes in, the judges will make a decision whether this is, an emergency, and if they can issue the restraining order, then it'll put everything on hold so that they can then look at the constitutional questions. There are questions of, whether you can target a religion, whether that's constitutional, whether there was due process. I mean, the Constitution allows a person to go through a legal process, and Ferguson says that this executive order is unconstitutional because it doesn't allow that to happen.
And if the federal court upholds that, what is the White House able to do in response? Are they able to redraft the order to make it consistent with what the federal court's telling them they have to do, or do they have to appeal?
Well, that's a question. I guess both of those are a possibility. If the judge comes back and says that certain points of the order are unconstitutional, the White House could come back and make some changes, or just appeal that process and take it all the way to the Supreme Court. So it's hard to know yet.
Gosh, this is fascinating, isn't it? What's the support for this kind of action in Washington State? Washington State voted Democrat, right? And so there is public opinion behind these moves, both by your Attorney General and your Governor?
Definitely behind the Governor and the Attorney General. And Seattle has been, there have been protests every day. There have been demonstrations at the airport. There are people who were detained there. And so there's a lot of support for pushing back against this order and other of the president's orders.
Yes, Washington State taking Donald Trump on. Let's go over the border to Canada. A French-Canadian university student has been charged with the premeditated murder of 6 people following yesterday's shooting at a mosque in Quebec City. Alexandre Bissonnette made a brief appearance in court today. He also faces several charges of attempted murder, with 5 people in a critical condition in hospital. The police believe it was a lone wolf attack, contrary to reports last night. The BBC's Aloum Makboul is in Quebec City and filed this report.
It is a quiet suburban corner of Quebec City that was the site of this bloodshed. A gunman burst into the Islamic Cultural Centre during evening prayers, spraying the worshippers with bullets. Police say the victims were all men aged between 35 and 60, including, according to locals, a university professor.
Quebec is the most secure city. For me, it's beautiful. So to have an attack like this here...
Police said one man was detained close to the scene, but he's now thought to have been just a witness. The suspected gunman fled in his car across a bridge in the centre of the city, but pulled over and called police to turn himself in. He waited and appears to have been detained without a struggle. He's now been named as Alexandre Bissonnette, in his late 20s. Well, the police haven't talked about a motive as yet, but even though this is known to be a peaceful place with very little crime, that same mosque here in Quebec City has been targeted with Islamophobia before. In June, during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, a pig's head was left on the doorstep, but mosque leaders say there were no threats of late.
The House will now proceed to statements.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the killing a terrorist attack on Muslims.
To the more than 1 million Canadians who profess the Muslim faith, I want to say directly, we are with you. 36 million hearts are breaking with yours. And know that we value you.
In recent days, the Prime Minister stood up against some of the anti-Islamic rhetoric coming from the US, saying Canada would continue to welcome those fleeing persecution, no matter their faith.
That was the BBC's Ali Makboul in Quebec City. It's 90 minutes past 6 with Checkpoint on RNZ. Let's change the subject entirely. A film director has been called out by a recent law change banning anyone travelling from America from entering New Zealand with medicinal cannabis. Full stop. Mitchell Stein was deported from Auckland Airport on January 27th after openly declaring he was carrying cannabis prescribed by his doctor for pain management of a severe case of carpal tunnel syndrome. Mr. Stein says he was only made aware of a law change in December, which prohibits the import of any medicinal cannabis products from the US after officials saw his declaration form and the 2 ounces of cannabis he was carrying. He told me via Skype video he made an honest mistake. He had a doctor's certificate, he'd been prescribed it, and he declared it. But he shouldn't have had it at all, according to Customs. As a result, he was sent home. His 3-week holiday was ruined, and he says he was humiliated at the border as Customs officials went through their belongings.
All along the way, I was completely forthcoming. I told them upon arrival that I had this, and we were questioned in great detail about things that had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the cannabis. We were asked very personal questions by this agent. My wife, who is an attorney, was appalled by the questions that were being asked, but I motioned for her to please just keep it calm, because all I wanted to do at that point was to be as accommodating, cooperative, and law-abiding as I could possibly be to smooth the situation.
Mitch, did the police get involved in any stage? So you are talking to Customs people and they are searching you and questioning you, and you have real issues with the tone of that question line. Did the police come in, given that you were bringing cannabis into the country?
Yes, they did. As a matter of fact, there was an officer who came over to tell us that he had reviewed all of the details of the situation and had determined that we were not drug smugglers. We were not trying to break any laws. This was clearly an honest error, a misunderstanding based upon an understanding of a law that had up until just a month ago been in place. And he indicated to us that as far as the police were concerned, they had no cause to hold us, to charge us with any crime. And in fact, he offered to go with us to the immigration office to attest to that fact, to tell the people in immigration, hey, there are drug smugglers trying to get into our borders and we should do all we can to stop them. But here's a situation of somebody who was simply trying to bring his medicine into the country. It was a misunderstanding. We have no problem with it at this point. That was our understanding from the police officer directly.
So you arrived with cannabis that you had been prescribed, that you had a prescription for and a doctor's covering letter for, and you were prevented from entering New Zealand and sent home.
Exactly. And beyond just being denied entrance to New Zealand and being sent home, hours earlier, when my wife was waiting with me in the immigration office, the agent who had been dealing with me the whole time came out and told my wife that since she was no longer a person of interest, that she would be allowed to leave and continue the trip. And she would have to then take her suitcase and go into the airport lobby to wait for me. And she was very upset at being split up, because we're a team. We're traveling here together. We've been together 14 years. We're here to enjoy your country with our son, and we're being separated at the border. So she was in tears. I did all that I could to help calm her down. And I said, don't worry, I'll be out in a little while. This is all going to get taken care of. Well, it wasn't. And several more hours went by, and I was interviewed, and I explained the situation, and I explained that I'm here with medicine with a doctor's prescription. I'm not a drug smuggler. I'm not a terrorist. I don't have any explosives. I'm not bringing heroin into the country. This is a non-lethal, naturally occurring plant. And I followed what I believe to be the letter of the law. There was no attempt to hide anything, to smuggle anything, or anything other than completely above board. Regardless, the agent informed me that since the law had just changed, my importation of my medicine was now being considered importation of drugs. And in fact, the amount that I brought in was large enough to now possibly have me charged with intent to distribute.
Did you say to them, take the cannabis, I will come into New Zealand without it? Did you make that offer?
I did. I made the offer. I said, look, you have now confiscated my medicine. I am not arguing that point. I'm not saying I want it back. It's an unfortunate situation. It was an honest error on my part. But now that you have the cannabis and you see that I am being upfront and forthcoming and I'm not a smuggler, can I at least join my wife and son for this trip? And he said, absolutely not, because since you admitted that you use cannabis as pain relief, you stand a very high risk of coming into our country and seeking it out.
Mitch, is your wife still here? So you were sent back to the United States for being in possession of $300 worth of medicinal cannabis that you had a doctor's note and prescription for, etc. Your wife, though, continued with the holiday that you had saved for and planned for and looked forward to?
She didn't want to. She was so upset. But she was forced to wait in the airport lobby for 4 hours waiting for this decision to be made, just torn up about the whole thing. And when I finally called her to tell her the decision that had been made, she broke down in tears and said that she wanted to come back with me. And I said, absolutely not. I will not allow this injustice to get in the way of your ability to spend the quality time with your son that you planned on. This isn't your fault. This is my fault. I acknowledge here and now that it's my responsibility to have checked with the laws before I left the country to see if by chance they had changed in the month since I checked them. That's my fault. It's my responsibility, and I don't put that on anyone else. I do, however, put the responsibility of the way I and my family were treated by your government on you and on your government, because there's no excuse for it. It's deplorable.
Mitchell Stein, who was deported from Auckland Airport after bringing in medicinal cannabis, which he had a doctor's prescription for, but which is not allowed into New Zealand, sent home. We'd love your feedback on that. New Zealand Customs told us whilst it's easy to determine whether cannabis can be lawfully supplied in most countries, this is not the case for the US, where there's a conflict between federal law and the law of an increasing number of states. As a result, on December 7th, it updated information to travellers from the US to clarify that cannabis plant matter and other products containing cannabis do not meet the test of, quote, lawfully supplied, end quote, and cannot be imported into New Zealand under the misuse of drugs exemption, as Mitch Stein learnt to his considerable cost. Who should hold the next sevens? Former New Zealand coach turned Samoa coach Gordon Titchens yesterday suggested Fiji or Samoa should host it next year, following last week's dire turnout in Wellington. But last night, Dunedin Mayor Dave Cull told us his city would be keen to host it. He says Dunedin has the best stadium in the country. So what do locals in Dunedin think? Is it the right time of the year, and would they go? Our reporter Ian Telfer went to find out.
An optimistic idea, I would have thought. But the chance of getting, 20,000, 2 days in a row. Mind you, I suppose if the students are around, might have a chance. A good idea if they got it, but...
Worth chasing or not?
Oh yes, of course it's worth chasing, provided it doesn't cost too much in the process. We don't want to have to buy it. Poor old ratepayers are coughing up enough money at the moment.
I've never been to the Wellington. I used to go when we were to the National Sevens in Queenstown, but I've never been to the international circuit sevens here.
Because it seems to be sort of crashing up there.
Yeah, it seems to get a little bit empty every year. I don't know whether it's ticket prices or if it's just the place where they're having it. But yeah, it needs to get a bit of a revamp. Yeah.
And if Dunedin revamped it?
Yeah, I feel like there'd be a few things. You'd have to look at the costs of it and also, like I said, accommodation and things like that. But it would be good if they put a bit of effort into it. Yeah.
Worth a try?
Yeah, definitely worth a try, yeah.
I don't actually know anything about the Sevens, yeah.
You haven't been?
Nah.
Would you go?
Nah, not for me.
Not your thing?
Nah, but... yeah, I guess like if it's good for Dunedin, then why not?
Looked to me like in Wellington there weren't enough crowds, there weren't enough people, and it seems to have lost favour. I don't know if Dunedin would do a better job.
I mean, I guess the idea is maybe Wellington's sick of it and somewhere else should give it a go, but...
Well, it may be that everyone's sick of it, because people used to go from all over New Zealand to actually go to the Sevens and dress up, and it was a big thing. People booked their holidays a long time in advance. But now that seems to have gone for some reason, and fashion's gone.
It's probably not such a bad idea. I mean, all the students could certainly bolster the population there, or the attendance, should I say. Yeah. Very nice.
Would you go?
Yeah, probably would. Get amongst it. Yeah, sounds like a bit of fun, eh?
What do you think the chances are?
Oh, pretty low. I don't know. I don't think they'll do it.
Those were the people, some of the people of Dunedin talking to Ian Telfer about whether or not they'd support the Sevens. Just before we go tonight, Checkpoint has been hearing that an announcement will be made in roughly half an hour about what is being described as a public health issue in parts of Auckland, South Auckland. We think several health sources have told Checkpoint the announcement will be made at 7 o'clock this evening. It's not exactly clear what the public health issue is or whether it will be made by the DHB or the government. One source told Checkpoint that nurses and auxiliary staff will be deployed to deal with the matter. Radio New Zealand News is looking at this and will bring you anything on it as it comes to hand throughout the night. Tonight with Brian, of course, after 7. That's it from Checkpoint for today. On behalf of our excellent team, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your company, and we will be back tomorrow night here at 5 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6:30. I'm Paul Brennan. Good evening. Donald Trump has fired the US Acting Attorney General for defying his ruling to ban travellers from Muslim-majority countries. An Iranian with dual New Zealand citizenship says she can't get an assurance from US authorities if she will be allowed into the States. Despite tougher visa rules, foreigners are still flocking to New Zealand, and growing petrol margins are under the government microscope, with the gap between fuel costs and retailers' charges more than doubling in the past decade. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Sick of the blokes going on about the tackle ball law, or the kids bickering over whose turn it is with the flash boogie board, or Cheryl going on and on and on about your cousin's wedding and how your top is a little snug round the middle. Well, stick in your earbuds, plug in, and